in the big picture, again, we have been talking about human resource management, leadership, recruiting, managing, communications. We've been doing a lot of discussion around these basic topics in terms of how can you better run a business? What are some of the things that you can apply as you move forward in your careers? This particular topic tonight is like the icing on the cake. I hope none of us are ready for it yet. We're talking retirement and succession planning tonight. And effectively, the earlier you start thinking about this as a business person, the better prepared you are in order to ensure business continuity and maximize the likelihood that your business will continue and you will continue to benefit from it. So what we're looking at tonight then is really surrounding that issue of replacement of staff, yourself, and succession planning. One of the interesting things that I like to show is this bit of information that Statistics Canada has gathered with regards to Newfoundland and Labrador. The folks in the universe, they call this the snake eating the elephant. This kind of represents the problem and the opportunity we have in Newfoundland and Labrador right now. Essentially, this is called a population pyramid, and it measures the various age ranges of people, male and female, over the last half century, I would say it is, in terms of that. And you can see back in, I'm just going to wait for it to cycle back here, and then I'll stop it. Okay, back in 1971, when I was in grade 1, 1971, you saw a population of Newfoundland and Labrador looked a lot like this. There were a heck of a lot of kids. Okay, if you look down at the bottom, this is people in the age range, say, under 25. And you can see relative to the entire population, we had a lot of young people in Newfoundland and Labrador. Those people were the labor force that are getting ready to retire today. And as you see, as we move into 1986, for example, you can see that this group were still fairly young, and there weren't a lot of older people. As we move through the 2000s, now we're up to 2016, which is the latest information that Statistics Canada has, you can see here is this group now. This group of the 1971 young people are now in this range somewhere between 50 and 70 years old. This is what we call the baby boomers, or the tail end of the baby boomers. These are people born after World War II and usually born in the 1960s, the mid-1960s. All of those people now are thinking about retiring. And as you can see, that's a lot of people. And if this projected forward, we're going to see that in the next 20 years, that proverbial elephant inside the snake is going to run off the edge of the proverbial life cliff. So you got a lot of people now who are thinking about retirement, and a lot of people running into their retirement years or golden years. If we look down at the bottom, compared to the fatness of that curve that we saw in the 1970s, if you look at how many people were in the 1970s, compared to the broad number of people that were there, there's not nearly as many now as there used to be. So we're faced with a double problem. The first problem is all of us who are in the 50-plus range are looking at retirement in the near future. The problem is that there's not a lot of people in behind us to take over. And that creates a serious problem for succession planning in Newfoundland. Who is the talent, for example, that's going to come up? Particularly, this is a particular problem in the trade. If you look at the average age of tradespeople, it tends to be very high in the 50 range in Newfoundland. And the question is, are there enough graduates coming out of the various schools who are ready to replace these people who are getting ready to retire? And the simple answer is no, there's not. Are there still lots of jobs in those industries? There certainly are. Save for right now. We live in weird times now, but there's still lots of projects on the go. There's still all across Canada, it's not just in Newfoundland. There's still a demand for people who are pipe fitters, electricians, carpenters. There's houses being built. There's things that need to be fixed. So there's a lot of opportunity for people who are in or entering the field now. This group is going to move out, and these young people, or relatively young people, are going to have some great opportunities as we move forward. So that kind of sets the stage. Let me switch back here now. That kind of sets the stage for our discussion tonight, because what we need to be able to do is to think about our succession planning in the context of the Newfoundland and Labrador situation right now. And that demographic reality that we are facing is certainly something that is all of us need to be aware of. So we're looking at this idea of succession planning from the perspective of retirement, and from our own retirement, that is, but also from the perspective of growing the organization and ensuring that there are people there to fill roles as they come available. So we need to think about, in terms of succession, our long-run needs, and how are we going to bring in the talent to meet those long-run needs. If we look at doing this from a succession planning point of view, we ask ourselves, this is a lot of trouble to think about into the future. To cast your mind into the future and say, well, who am I going to need? How many of those people are going to need? What skills are they going to need? What are some of the challenges they're going to have to replace finding those people with those skills? All of this sort of thing is a bit heavy on people. So there has to be a good rationale for doing this. And if you think about what some of the primary reasons for doing this are, some of the rationale, in the long run, there's less time and expense occurred if we think about this up front. Filling vacancies is time consuming and expensive, but if we don't have a plan and we're not aware that people are getting ready to retire, that's going to be even worse, because we'll be scrambling to find help. And where do we find it? Do we find it inside our company? Do we find it outside our company? And how can we think about this ahead of time so we're not caught? And if we're not caught, at least we can prepare. The other important thing about succession planning is that it helps as a positive, from a human resource perspective, it helps send positive vibes out to existing staff, okay? If there are opportunities, yourself, if you're working in a place that has opportunities for growth, your own growth, proper ability to move up in the organization, make more money, get a more interesting job, job variety, managing more people. If you know those opportunities exist, it will certainly motivate you. So we need to be able to use succession planning to kind of, from a management point of view, to say to people who are out there, there are some opportunities here for you in this organization. And we can identify who those people are that are what we call high potential employees, people that would certainly fill those roles. And we could groom those young people to meet the challenges as they come forward. Let's say, for example, you got a journeyman pipe fitter in your organization. You think that person could potentially be a manager in the future. What kind of skills do they bring, and what kind of skills do they need? Thinking about in terms of future training and stuff like that you want to put yourself, put front and center in this. That employee, if that employee is aware of those opportunities coming up, that will certainly speak a lot to the employee about being valued, and it will help them stay with your organization and allow them to look forward to continued growth. It certainly, too, makes for your organization to be more appealing. Both potential employees and potential investors will see a succession plan as a good tool for the future to say, okay, you've thought about how many employees you're going to need, what kind of skills you're going to need, and it certainly speaks to the future of the business. If a business plans for the future, that means it's planning for something that's going to be around to look at. If we think about Succession can be really broken down into two major roles. One is a surface type thing, and the other thing is much more in depth. Simple replacement of employees as they leave. That's pretty simple, straightforward. Replacing by hiring people, bringing new people in, finding out what people are available. That's pretty standard for organizations, and it tends to be more of a short-term focused. Oh, Johnny left, so I need to replace Johnny with someone else. That tends to be short-term focus. But if we could think about it from a longer-term process, succession planning looks at how can we think about the pool. What can we think about in terms of potential candidates? Who are working for us now that could be potential candidates? How can we work this better? So a well-constructed succession plan can provide you as a manager with a lot more ideas of who good potential successors are and be able to meet those needs, and certainly improve the opportunities for people who work for you, but for yourself too, in order to find good people. I've had the opportunity of all places, as I've mentioned before, with the town of Clarenville, I'm a counselor, but from what did I get out of that? What are some of the things that I take out of that role as a counselor? Well, one of the big things I've been involved in on my time on council is doing exactly this, succession planning. We, as a council, are looking at a staff in Clarenville of about 30 people, okay? If you think about the town, about 30 people work for the town. And over the course of the last 10 years, it's amazing how many of those 30 people have retired. And really, it's a function of the fact that the town, everybody who gets hired at the town are about of the same age, so that they all get to retire around the same time. And that's what we've done. We've had to, from our perspective, think about what are the roles that we want to fill, what are the skills that people would need in those roles moving forward. And with the town, a lot of things have changed. We think about what did someone require 30 years ago when they came to work for the town? Well, usually they had a high school diploma. But now we go looking, well, what kind of, college diploma or university degree do they have? And one of the things we're looking for now, we got a job out. I don't know if you may have seen it yourself. We're looking for an engineering / public works manager type job, right? And when we talked about that, we've been talking about that for a while. We said, what are the skills that person would need? Is it suffice to say to hire someone who has some basic knowledge about operating in the municipal environment? What skills would that person need? What are some of the things that person should be able to do? What are some of the experiences that person would want to bring? These are things that we've talked about and thought about long before we ever advertised the job. So from a succession plan point of view, that has been a great learning for me in terms of that, in terms of if we got 30 staff in the course of my time on council, I'm sure we have replaced 15. And for each of those jobs, we've had to think about 2 years before everyone retired. We had to think about where's the town going? What are some of the skills that people need? What roles do we want to see people fulfill? How are those jobs going to be organized? All of the things that succession planning talks about and looks at is really embodied in that whole process that we've done. And it has paid off for us because instead of getting caught, for example, with a retirement, we know when people are going to retire. Or we have a good idea. We don't know exactly, but we have a good idea when people are going to retire. And 2 years before they retire, we look at the position and we say, well, do we need the position? B, what features of the position are going to change? And C, what skills would someone need in order to be able to do that new position? So these are some of the things that we put into. So if you go into an organization with 30 or 40 people like a town, where you have generally an older staff, that is something that you're going to have to do. And depending on the type of organization you work for, this could be very useful. Now, if you go into an organization with a rather new staff, young staff, They're well qualified. Probably succession planning is not going to be so important. But I would bet you dollars to donuts, again, considering the chart that with the pyramid chart that I showed at the beginning, most organizations in Newfoundland are like the town of Clarenville, that they have a lot of people getting ready to retire, and they have to start evaluating what they're going to do in order to move towards the future successfully by planning. So if we think about this planning process, we as managers need to kind of think about, well, how we going to, what kind of things do we really need to in order to make this work? So planning has been broken down into a number of key steps that organizations must or should do in order to make it best potential. The very, very, very first thing to do is some consideration for going on. Okay, so this step one is really background work. What's going on? We've got to identify what exactly we want to do in our business, and we've had to do that with say, what is it this town wants to be? How does this town want to grow? Where do we see ourselves in 10 years, ourselves in 20 years? We got to think about a strategic vision, and we're going to talk about strategic planning and it's coming up, but a strategic vision is a long-term plan. Strategic vision is really where we see ourselves, and I'm much more of a believer in this concept than I ever was before, because if we don't know where we're going, we're never going to get there. The idea of a strategic vision is to think about the ideal situation for this business in the next, now you can fill in how many years. 5 years is fairly predictable. Years not so predictable, and as you move out is even less predictable. Certainly to give the future some thought and say, where is it that we want this place to be in that future? So if you can state your strategic vision and plans, what is it you want to do? That's important to this overall process. We've got to identify critical roles. If any organization is going to have critical roles in it. If you're a pipe fitting organization, for example, you do a lot of pipe fitting, that's going to be a critical role. You're going to have people there who are qualified pipe fitters. If you're building, if you're a house constructor, a building company, you're going to have to think about, who's going to be putting up the buildings? What kind of role, what kind of skills do they need? Carpentry, cement, planning, all of the electricians, plumbing. You think about all of the roles that are involved in house building and house construction. Those are some of the roles that those organizations are going to have to look at. So we really need to kind of think about those 3 points. And this is what I would call, it's not crystal balling, but it's gazing into the future. And you really need to be able to kind of think about that strategically in your thought process as you move forward. Where is it we want to be? Where is it we want to go? So, and it kind of helps you point a direction at the very least. It lays out some sort of a roadmap. So that background work, even though you say you're not doing anything in that stage, that's probably the most important stage, because you really kind of lay it out. Where do I want to go, and what am I going to need in order to get there? Then you start drilling down. Okay, and step 2 is the first stage of drilling down. What are the key areas of the job that you're going to be looking at? So as I say, if you're constructing houses, for example, you're going to think about carpenters, you're going to think about electricians, you're going to think about plumbers. These are some of the key roles that you're going to need. Okay? So you're going to have to think about those key areas and key positions. And we've done that with the town. And we kind of gone back and forth in terms of, how has the town changed in the last 50 years? What, going forward, what are some of the things that we need to do differently? Are there roles that can be combined? We don't necessarily, you got a lot of inertia in organizations to keep things the same, but you really need to kind of step back and say, is this really going to work into the future? Is that something we need to do? So those positions oftentimes are going to change into the future. We got to think about operational capability. you know, computers, for example, technology. Technology is getting more pervasive. If you have an organization where you have people who are technologically illiterate, that's something you're going to have to look at. And if your organization is going to need more of that, you're going to have to think about what kind of people we're going to hire. Are those the skill sets that should get put into the jobs? And that's going to include management and the people who do the work, the key tradespeople. You need to think about what is it that we really need. So you need to determine what skills are required and the degree to which a person needs to be competent in that skill. As I say, it could be any number of skills that a person would have. So once you kind of narrowed it down there to say, okay, we need this type of person with this type of skill or these type of people with these type of skills, then you move on and you say, are there any people in our own organization right now who are ready, willing, and potentially able to fulfill those roles? It's always important to think internally first. Who do you have that knows your business, knows how the business operates, have the inside knowledge, who you think could take those extra tasks and run with it and make it successful? That works not only in saving trouble for you trying to find people, but it also helps encourage your existing employees because it gives them the opportunity to grow within their jobs. And I hope, for example, in the organizations you work in, having done this course, they're going to look at you and say, well, I identify you, the boss would identify you as a person to be able to fulfill some of those roles because you've done some of this training, for example. That will certainly help, make you stand out. So you need to identify and assess the employees that you have and what their capabilities are and the key areas and positions to identify. We had a meeting the week and we were talking about this issue with regards to succession planning and the like. And I found out, I had said, what we really need is some sort of an inventory of what kind of credentials our employees have. Already done, I found out. Oh, great. So there is the town has it's a spreadsheet, database, whatever you want to call it, to say, okay, well, Paul Tilley, he has this, and this. And that's important. And it's a bit of a pain. It has become a bit of a pain because keeping up with what people have can be painful because it keeps changing or to keep adding to it. But we could certainly look at that database and say, okay, look, these people have some computer skills that we can build upon in order to advance our technological. If we say technology is something where we need to build, improve, that way we can identify those people as potential people to move into those positions. Transfer plans, succession plans. This is where you actually write all this stuff down, okay? So you've done this preliminary work in stage 1, 2, and 3, and now you're considering what you're going to do in order to codify this. So you write it down. You say, okay, well, Paul got this and this, but he doesn't have that and that. These are some of the types of training that Paul should be doing, or we should talk to Paul about whether he'd be interested in doing this. So it kind of like starts to solidify the first three things into a hard plan to say, well, we're going to ask this person to see if they're interested in doing that. You should at this stage be able to identify who it is you're going to ask and what kind of skills you need from those people. Fifth, we got to be able to take those plans that we just wrote down and sit down with the employees that we've identified and kind of lay out a career path for them. What is it that we'd like to see happen to this person that we've identified? We'd like you sit down with them, for example, in a meeting and say, okay, we'd like you to do some training in web-based web design. Okay, you know a bit about computers, and you obviously have an interest in that. We recognize that, but we're going to have to create a website for our business, or we're going to have to be able to use a certain degree of technology in our business. we'd like you to go and learn about that, or we'd like to be able to get you up to speed on that. So what you're going to do is meet with employees, usually individually as opposed to group. Now, it depends on exactly what you're doing, but this has to be done with a certain degree of care for the individual, because they may not like what you're asking them. You know, they might say, "No, I'm not interested in doing this. What are you asking me this for?" You know, they theoretically could do that. So you don't want to put someone on the spot. So meeting with everyone individually and trying to identify if that is your thoughts match up with their thoughts. You know, if you think that they're a potential growth, there is a growth opportunity for those people, maybe those people are interested, maybe they're not. And if you did force them to do something like that, they could perceive it as a bit of a demotion, or a bit of a bridge too far for them. You know, if for example you wanted them to go do some training, they didn't feel comfortable doing that, and if you forced them to do it, they would resent it. That sort of thing. You don't want to run into that. So this is where this step 5 comes in, is really to kind of sit down, have a chat with someone and say, are you really interested in moving up and in this particular direction? Finally, or near finally, what we need to be able to do is to, once we've done this, once we've gone through this process, we need to say, did this actually work, or was this just a giant waste of time? Okay, so we need to be able to meet with the people and move the peoples into the planned position, and then after a couple of years or whatever, you want to say, did that actually work? How would we do it different? How would we do it different? What are some of the things that we should do more of? And what are some of the things we should do less of in terms of this whole process? So this succession plan process, this multi-stage process could take several years in order to work through. But the first couple of stages of it are, I call them desk work. You need to sit down and think about your business, where you want your business to go, plot out a plan for how that business is going to grow, and who's going to make it grow. What are some of the critical roles? And with the town, I know we've had several big meetings to discuss these sorts of things. You know, what are the key objectives of the town? Where do we see the town in the next 5 years? And what are some of the critical roles? And as I say, those critical roles have changed a lot over the years, and how we do things have changed a lot. We have identified key positions there, for example, and as I just mentioned, some of those key positions are getting action now as we move into looking for a public works manager position. That's something that has been discussed in those initial stages, and we're moving forward with in terms of hiring for that now. It is always helpful to look within your staff first, and we've done that. Actually, we've gone out, we've said to a couple of potential staffers to say, would you be interested in that? And several of them have stepped up, and others have said, no, I'm not interested in doing that. So again, this idea of meeting with them and talking with them on a one-on-one level to kind of gauge their interest is very important. The evaluation of the effectiveness of this process, I would suggest to you from a town point of view, from my own experience, it is an ongoing thing. Some we've had more success with than others. But again, all of it comes with some learnings. We would do it different next time. We would change the process somewhat. We would do more of it. We would do that worked well. Let's do more of that. So we've had all variations and all shades in terms of our efforts with regards to what we've looked at in terms of our succession planning. Overall, though, it has had as a pluses and minuses. Some things have worked, some things haven't. But overall, I would suggest to you that because we've had this plan, we're much more organized now in terms of replacing our staff as our staff retire, and ensuring that we've got the right mix of staff now that town probably didn't have before. It wasn't a function of something was wrong before. It was just the town has evolved in terms of size, and like any organization, it changes over time. So that mix that existed 20 years ago or 30 years ago didn't really fit for today. And so this constantly, it's an evolution as opposed to a revolutionary process. So that's really what we're looking at in terms of succession planning, is being able to think ahead using some strategic planning process. In other words, you think about it a lot and you write it down in order to ensure that the business and your business and any business that you work for will be able to continue to grow into the future.